In the year 1917, on a hillside near the village of Fatima in Portugal, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared 6 times in successive months to 3 shepherd children, Lucia de Santos and her cousins Francisco and Jacinto Marto. The Blessed Virgin's message to the children, which was a message to be given to all mankind, was that man must cease offending God, for he is already too much offended, that great punishments will fall upon the world if man does not do penance, and that God wants to establish in the world devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Our Blessed Mother asked at Fatima that the faithful pray the Rosary every day. On October 13, 1917, she performed the great miracle of the sun, witnessed by 70,000 people, which, over a period of about 10 minutes, the people saw the sun dance in the sky, plummet to the earth, and return to its place. Even the anti-Catholic press at the time reported the details of the miracle. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Fatima message is the third part of the Fatima secret, the so-called Third Secret, which was given on July 13, 1917. The first 2 parts of the secret, Sister Lucy recorded in her memoirs that she wrote in August 1941. The first part described the vision of hell that she and her 2 cousins saw. And the second part of the secret concerned devotion to the Immaculate Heart. 2 envelopes containing the secret were ultimately transferred to the Vatican in 1957. Sister Lucy had written on the outside of each of the envelopes that the secret was to be opened and revealed to the world in 1960. In January 1959, Pope John XXIII announced the forthcoming Second Vatican Council. In August of the same year, after having read the secret, he was reported to have said, "The third secret does not concern the years of my pontificate." Thus, 1960 came and went, and despite the Virgin's explicit request, the secret was not revealed, even though the entire Catholic world was awaiting its publication. In February 1960, a high Vatican official made an anonymous report to the press, stating, "It is most likely that the letter in which Sister Lucy wrote down the words of the Virgin, which Our Lady confided as a secret to the 3 little shepherds, in the Covada era will never be opened. It is most probable that the secret of Fatima will remain forever under absolute seal." Cardinal Saragera, the Cardinal Patriarch of Lisbon at the time, expressed his disappointment. "I affirm categorically that I was not consulted on this subject. What I did know of its non-disclosure in 1960, I learned through the papers." Cardinal Saragera, who was Patriarch of Lisbon, held the most exalted place in the Catholic Church in Portugal and was well known for his fervent devotion to the Fatima message. Yet, even though Pope John XXIII had consulted a number of prelates regarding the third secret, it seems Cardinal Saragera was deliberately shut out. This is particularly troubling, since Cardinal Saragera was certainly the most knowledgeable of all the prelates about the details and events at Fatima. Yet the Cardinal learned that the secret would not be released, not from anyone in John XXIII's Vatican, but from the newspapers, just like everyone else. Like the Cardinal, Catholics the world over were stunned and subsequently disillusioned by this development.
The first time I heard of Fatima, I was a Protestant boy in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and the year was 1960. I was a school patrol fellow and walked around with my flag protecting my fellow students, and was chosen to go to Washington, D.C. on a special trip. And I was getting ready, going on the bus, driving in the car with my mother, and heard on the radio that the third secret of Fatima would not be revealed, that the Pope had read it, and it was decided by the officials in the Vatican that it would not be announced to the world.
That was the decade that changed the face of the world and changed the face of the Church. So it's not at all surprising that she chose that year and said that in that year things would be clearer, because in a very short time frame, disasters would happen to the world and to the Church, to the families, to our Christian society.
Does the third secret indeed predict disasters throughout the world? and in particular portray a crisis within the Church? A crisis of faith? Sister Lucy herself provided a key clue when she wrote the following in her fourth memoir. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc.
Sister Lucy said that the faith was going to be preserved in Portugal. That implies that the faith is going to be destroyed in most other places. That's the clear implication. And I think we've seen at least one or two generations of young people in which the faith has been totally lost.
What is contained in that etc.?
Fatima scholars are in agreement that within the mysterious etc. one will find the words of the Virgin Mary, which predict a great crisis of faith within the Catholic Church, a loss of dogma outside of the nation of Portugal, and an apostasy reaching even the highest levels of the Catholic hierarchy. And this is confirmed by those who have actually read the text of the Third Secret.
Cardinal Alfredo Ottaviani was prefect of the Holy Office. And at the time, the Holy Office was the preeminent dicastery of the Roman Curia. He was the one who pronounced on orthodoxy and also had the jurisdiction over the final approval or disapproval of apparitions. He stated in an address he gave in 1967 at the Antonianum that the Third Secret of Fatima is set forth on one sheet of paper. Cardinal Mario Luigi Ciappi was a Dominican priest who had been made a cardinal by Pope Paul VI. He was papal theologian under Paul VI, John Paul I, and early in the reign of Pope John Paul II. Cardinal Ciappi stated in his letter to Professor Baumgartner that in the Third Secret it is revealed, among other things, that the great apostasy in the Church will begin at the top.
Father Joaquin Alonso, who died in 1981, was the official archivist at Fatima for 6 years and had many conversations with Sister Lucy. Here is what he had to say about the secret. It is therefore completely probable that the text makes concrete references to the crisis of faith within the Church and to the negligence of the pastors themselves and the internal struggles in the very bosom of the Church and of grave pastoral negligences of the upper hierarchy. One of the most important testimonies regarding the contents of the secret came from an interview given by Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. At the time, he was the prefect of the Vatican Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and as such had access to the secret, and he read it.
Cardinal Ratzinger, in his 1984 interview with Jesu magazine, he said that the Third Secret concerns the dangers to the faith, to the life of the Christian, and therefore to the life of the world.
The council began scarcely 2 years after 1960, the year the Third Secret was supposed to have been revealed. Given the period of unprecedented upheaval and scandal in the Catholic Church following the council, a growing number of Catholics are convinced of a link between the Third Secret and the council and its aftermath, especially the changes in the Catholic Mass, which began in the early 1960s.
In the 1930s, when he was still Vatican Secretary of State, the future Pope Pius XII made an astonishing prophecy about the upcoming upheaval in the Church. He predicted with terrific degree of accuracy just about everything that was going to go wrong in the Church. And his prophecy is recounted in the biography of Pius XII by Monsignor Roche. Let me read to you from that prophetic remark. I am worried by the Blessed Virgin's messages to Lucy of Fatima. This persistence of Mary about the dangers which menace the Church is a divine warning against the suicide of altering the faith in her liturgy, her theology, and her soul. I hear all around me innovators who wish to dismantle the sacred chapel, destroy the universal flame of the Church, reject her ornaments, and make her feel remorse for her historical past. A day will come when the civilized world will deny its God, when the Church will doubt, as Peter doubted. She will be tempted to believe that man has become God. In our churches, Christians will search in vain for the red lamp where God awaits them. Like Mary Magdalene weeping before the empty tomb, they will ask, where have they taken him? So about 30 years before the Second Vatican Council, the future Pope Pius XII predicted everything that would go wrong during and after the Council in the Catholic Church. He predicted drastic changes to the liturgy, so drastic that people would not even be able to find the sanctuary lamp in Catholic churches. He predicted theological changes. He even predicted this movement in the Church to make the Church apologize for her own past, as if the Church were to be ashamed of everything that had gone before and should feel remorse for it. And he linked these predictions to the message of Fatima, which is very interesting because none of the words of the Virgin of Fatima published to date contain any reference to these catastrophic developments in the Church. Clearly, Pope Pius XII was referring to a portion of the message of Fatima containing words of the Virgin Mary which we have yet to see.
There are lots of dangers to changing the liturgy, especially in a radical way. First of all, the sense of stability that people had from knowing what to expect is gone. In fact, in a period there from the mid-1950s onward, not only were the people subjected to change, but probably more important, the clergy were subjected to change to the point where they didn't know what was coming next themselves, and they kind of stopped caring because they couldn't keep up with it. It's like, okay, this week they want us to do this week they want us to do that. Let's just do whatever.
Elements of Protestantism, both in the symbolism and in the wording of the liturgy, were brought into and mixed into a Catholic framework to the extent that the makers of the New Rite flatly stated that this is no longer the Roman Rite, it is a new creation.
I would sum up the effect of the changes of the liturgy in the last 40 years on the faithful as there's no more faith in the faithful.
Even Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, said that the liturgical changes which followed the Second Vatican Council were a breach in the history of the liturgy, whose consequences could only be tragic. But the crisis in the Church also includes other changes. In his prophecy in the 1930s before the Second Vatican Council, the future Pope Pius XII spoke not only of the suicide of altering the faith in the Church's liturgy, but also in her theology. And here we see emerging in the post-conciliar period the theological novelty of the modern ecumenical movement.
Unfortunately, when we speak of ecumenism, we're not simply talking about propositions, doctrines set forth in the documents of the Second Vatican Council. There are consequences to these teachings because these are not something that are simply considered in the classrooms theoretically. The promulgation of the decrees on ecumenism and religious liberty have spawned in the Church a new orientation in the Church, an opening up of interreligious dialogue, of encouraging Catholics to become involved with members of other churches and other religions in such a way that has caused great confusion and even loss of faith among the Catholic people. What it leads to, I think, is a very good concrete example is the desecration of the sanctuary of Our Lady of Fatima. When the rector, Monsignor Luciano Guerra, invited the Hindus and a Hindu priest into the shrine of Our Lady of Fatima, and they offered, and the Hindu priest wearing Hindu vestments performed the pagan idolatrous ceremonies of Hinduism on the Catholic altar at the shrine of Our Lady of Fatima, at the Cappellina, the little chapel, the place where Our Lady appeared.
There are no other churches that our Lord would found as a means to salvation. There is only one religion. God cannot reveal different religions with contradictory ideas about himself, about the way how to save one's soul. So to accept this unity in plurality means to reject the Catholic Church and Catholic religion. It goes together.
The new church has become ecumenical, as I call it, and turning anywhere and everywhere to embrace all other religions. The only thing in the modern church that is not acceptable is tradition.
Lucy of Fatima, she described what's happening in the world as the effect of a diabolical disorientation.
I think this diabolical disorientation is associated with the third secret.
I believe that when the secret was opened, it was clear that this secret was about the apostasy in the church, and that this would be brought about by a change in the Mass and by a council. And therefore, that was obviously the plan of John the 23rd, to call a council. He had already made the preparations, and to alter the Mass in some way in line with these new teachings that were to be promulgated by the council. And therefore, a rebuke to the Pope, a statement that if these things are done, disasters shall come to the world and to the church, and the faith shall be lost throughout Europe. I think that's what was very shocking for him, and in my mind, that explains his stark response, and a response that should not have been given. This is not for our time. Well, it was precisely for our time. Our Lady had said it was for our time, and it was for him.
Besides speaking of the spiritual crisis within the Catholic Church, does the third secret speak of a divine chastisement of the world at large? None other than the former Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, has confirmed that it does.
Cardinal Ratzinger's revelation in the 1984 Jesus magazine interview that what is contained in the third secret corresponds to what has been said again and again in other Marian apparitions is very significant. Because in the other Marian apparitions he refers to, there is a reference not only to a spiritual crisis in the Church, but to a divine punishment of the entire world. And one of these apparitions, approved as authentic by Church authorities, is the apparition of Our Lady at Akita, Japan in 1973. In this apparition, Our Lady speaks of a twin chastisement, a chastisement within the Church consisting of a crisis in faith and morals and discipline, and a divine punishment of the whole world. And at Akita, she gave some terrifying details about the nature of that divine punishment of the world. And by choosing to appear at Akita on October 13, 1973, the very anniversary of the miracle of the sun, Our Lady was sending a message, unmistakably connecting the Akita apparitions to the Fatima apparitions.
In 1973, at Akita in Japan, the Virgin Mary spoke to Sister Agnes Esagawa, a deaf nun. While praying in the chapel, Sister Agnes witnessed a great light surrounding a wooden statue of Our Lady. Sister Agnes then heard a voice coming from the statue, which delivered 3 messages to her. The first in July, the second in August, and the last and most important message on October 13, 1973. Our Blessed Mother warned, the work of the devil will infiltrate even the Church in such a way that one will see cardinals opposing cardinals, bishops against other bishops. The priests who venerate me will be scorned and opposed by their confreres. Churches and altars sacked, the Church will be full of those who accept compromise, and the demon will press many priests and consecrated souls to leave the service of the Lord. In the same message, the Virgin further warned that not only the Catholic Church, but the whole world will suffer the consequences of this loss of faith. She further said, if men do not repent and better themselves, the Father will inflict a terrible punishment on all humanity. It will be a punishment greater than the deluge, such as no one has ever seen before. Fire will fall from the sky and will wipe out a great part of humanity, the good as well as the bad, sparing neither priests nor faithful. The survivors will find themselves so desolate that they will envy the dead. After a thorough investigation by Bishop Ito, the bishop of the diocese in which Akita is located, the message of Akita was approved as being worthy of belief. Howard D., the Philippine ambassador to the Vatican, said in a 1998 interview with Inside the Vatican magazine that Bishop Ito was certain Akita was an extension of Fatima, and Cardinal Ratzinger personally confirmed to me that these 2 messages of Fatima and Akita are essentially the same. It is impossible not to notice the number of discrepancies between what was known about the secret prior to 2000 and what was revealed on June 26th of that year.
We know that the Vatican said in 1960 that it was not going to reveal the third secret of Fatima to the world as expected. And in making that anonymous announcement through a press agency, it referred specifically to, and I think I'm quoting verbatim, the words of the Virgin which she confided to the three seers. So there was a specific reference in 1960 to the words of the Virgin in the third secret of Fatima. And yet the text published by the Vatican in June of 2000 involves a vision of the Pope in white being shot down and so forth, in which we find no words whatsoever uttered by Our Lady of Fatima. None. So already we have a major discrepancy. There must be a text, the one referred to by the Vatican back in 1960, that contains words of Our Lady confided to the seers.
Another discrepancy surfaces from Bishop Venancio's 1957 testimony regarding the secret.
We know that when Bishop Venancio held the sealed envelope containing the secret up to the light, he saw inside that envelope one sheet of paper. But the text produced by the Vatican in June of 2000 consists of 4 sheets of paper. So you have 2 texts. One, a handwritten single sheet, and the other, 4 pages of handwriting.
Another discrepancy surfaces from Bishop Venancio's 1957 testimony regarding the secret.
When the Bishop of Fatima held that sealed envelope up to the light, he saw what he estimated to be about 25 lines of text on that single sheet of paper. The Vatican's text produced in June of 2000 contains 62 lines of text. 25 lines in one, 62 lines in another. Clearly, we're dealing with 2 different documents.
There is also a discrepancy regarding where the secret had been stored in the Vatican.
We know from press coverage in Paris Match magazine that a text of the third secret of Fatima ended up in a wooden safe in the papal apartments in the 1950s. We know this because a picture was provided in Paris Match magazine showing that very papal safe. And yet, the Vatican tells us in June of 2000 that the text of the third secret they were producing at that time had been stored in the Holy Office archives, a totally different location. Once again, we're looking at 2 texts.
And finally, the question must be asked, where is heaven's explanation of the secret?
We know that when Our Lady spoke to the Fatima seers, she explained everything that they saw. Even something as obvious as hell, she explained to them. She said, and I quote, "You have seen hell where the souls of poor sinners go." Now, it was obvious they had seen hell. They saw souls burning in hell and floating about in the state of agony, and yet she explained that to them. But here we have this ambiguous vision of a bishop of white with an angel in heaven sending fire down toward the earth, the Pope being executed by a band of soldiers outside a half-ruined city, the Pope processing through the ruins of the city with dead bodies of clergy and laity alongside him, and absolutely no explanation of Our Lady.
Those in the Vatican who are possessed of this modernist way of thinking feel greatly threatened by the message of Fatima. And since they cannot suppress entirely what the Church has approved, they therefore seek to debunk it by putting a new spin on the message, to reinterpret the message, to make the message appear to be in agreement with their modernistic manner of thought.
Socci's book is a bombshell. This is a leading public intellectual in Italy. He has his own television show. He has personally hosted press conferences for both Cardinal Ratzinger and Archbishop Bertone, who at the time was no less than the secretary of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. This is a witness of unimpeachable integrity. Furthermore, Socci admits in his book that when he began his investigation, he totally accepted the Vatican party line on the meaning of the third secret, only to be totally convinced that there was in fact a text that has yet to be published. As he puts it in the book, I had to surrender to the evidence. Once he began to study the case, he had no choice but to conclude, as others have concluded, that there is indeed a missing text. And this is a tremendously favorable development for the effort to discover the truth in this matter.
But Socci's book goes even further. His investigation has uncovered the direct testimony of the personal secretary of Pope John XXIII, Archbishop Loris F. Capovilla. According to Capovilla, Pope John's successor, Paul VI, called for and read the contents of this envelope on June 27, 1963. However, the Vatican commentary on the vision, published in June 2000, states that Paul VI read a text pertaining to the secret on March 27, 1965, nearly 2 years later. Socci recounts that when an Italian journalist, Soledeo Ballini, asked Capovilla whether this meant that there were 2 envelopes containing 2 different texts pertaining to the secret, Archbishop Capovilla replied in Italian, "Per l'appunto," which translated means precisely so.
In his book, Il Quarto Segreto di Fatima, The Fourth Secret of Fatima, Antonio Socci, a great Italian journalist who has never been polemical against the Vatican in his previous positions, and who as well is personally known by the currently reigning Pope and esteemed by the current Secretary of State Tarcisio Bertone, reports in a perfect and absolute literal and exact manner the personal confirmation that Archbishop Capovilla, Emeritus Confidential Secretary of Pope John XXIII, gave to me about the existence of 2 different texts of the third secret of Fatima.
On May 10, 2007, Cardinal Bertone published his response to Socci in a book-length interview entitled The Last Seer of Fatima. Rather than directly responding to the challenges posed by Dr. Socci, the Cardinal instead resorted to personal attacks against the man himself. Throughout the writing of his book, until the present, Cardinal Bertone has refused to speak with Socci, despite the fact that Socci and Bertone previously had been on friendly terms. Dr. Socci easily refuted Cardinal Bertone's book in a newspaper article dated May 12, 2007. Unable to let the matter rest, on May 31, 2007, Cardinal Bertone appeared on the popular Italian television program Porta a Porta to deny the premise of Socci's book. But Socci was not allowed on the program, even though other journalists who knew far less about Fatima appeared on the set to interview the Cardinal. Socci later learned from the television station that Bertone made it clear that he wanted no challenges to his position on the broadcast. Dr. Socci refuted Cardinal Bertone's TV presentation on June 2nd, just 2 days later, in a second newspaper article.
On September 21, 2007, Cardinal Bertone held another event for the official presentation of his book, The Last Seer of Fatima, held here at the Pontifical Urbaniana University in Rome. We are here in front of its entrance. This event was attended by government dignitaries, bankers, Vatican prelates, and members of the press. In an attempt to once again have his questions answered by the Cardinal, Antonio Socci, I was with him here that day, attended the event. After he learned from the director of the Vatican press office that the Cardinal would not allow any questions to be asked of him, Socci and I proceeded to the main entrance of the auditorium, hoping to ask a question of the Cardinal on his way in, before he would enter inside the Aula Magna for the presentation. On the arrival of the Cardinal, seeing Socci at the entrance of the Aula Magna, Bertone changed his route and darted in another entrance. When the journalists present saw what had happened and Bertone's behavior, they immediately questioned Socci about the controversy. At this moment, Vatican security quickly descended upon us, demanding Socci to stop speaking with the press. Socci replied that he was a journalist and was not causing a problem for anyone. It was a public venue, and he had every right to be there and to talk with his colleagues. But the security then drove us by force from the university. They scratched one of my fingers while taking my cell phone by force from me. They demanded that I not record anything, something I wasn't doing anyway. Perhaps they were thinking of the cassette recording of my last conversation that I had with Archbishop Capovilla. That tape was in Socci's briefcase. And on that tape, the secretary of Pope John the 23rd confirmed explicitly that there is or there was an attachment to the secret published in 2000, and that attachment is still unpublished to this day.
I wouldn't be surprised at all if there were specifics about how this general apostasy and loss of faith would come about. Would be very damning for the people in charge now, because they're carrying it out.
Now, Our Lady came to Fatima as an emissary from God, as an ambassador from God. So it's not Our Lady's message, really. It is God sending Our Lady to us with these dire warnings. If she is giving us dire warnings, we not only have the right to know, we have to know for our own good.
The world at large have a right to know the third secret of Fatima, because it is very clear when the world goes off track, severely, not just Catholics, but the entire world, and the entire world was created by God and oriented to the end of being with God, so it concerns every soul born into the world, then God will, through a messenger, tell the world what it needs to know.
The situation is at once so ludicrous and so tragic and so overwhelming that the ordinary Catholic trying to do the right thing looks at the Church and is almost tempted to throw up his arms in despair and say, who am I? What can I do? Well, if the problem, as Sister Lucy has pointed out, is a diabolical disorientation, obviously the solution is a heavenly orientation. Okay? We have to turn away from the devil's direction and turn back to the direction of God, turn back to the direction of heaven. Now, obviously that direction is the one that has been pointed out by the Catholic Church through 2,000 years of her history. What every individual Catholic has to do is they have to more or less take a refresher course in their basic doctrine. Go back to the catechisms.
Our Lady of Fatima on October 13th said, "I've come to warn the faithful to amend their lives and ask pardon for their sins. They must not continue to offend our Lord anymore, because He's already too much offended." Certainly what we must do is amend our lives. Of course, we need to pray the Rosary to get the graces we need to amend our lives and to stay on the right course.
Many believe that with the consecration ceremony of 1984, the Pope had finally acceded to the request of heaven, of Our Lady, that he consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart. It's very curious, if that is the case, that he never mentioned Russia. It is as if I were to make beef stew using a recipe that never mentions beef.
The ultimate solution will be when the Pope enjoins the bishops of the world to consecrate Russia to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart with him in a specific ceremony. That will be the ultimate. But the means to regaining the faith and getting the grace for the Holy Father to eventually do that is for as many people to be worshiping in a truly Catholic manner as possible.
Now, good liturgy drives out bad liturgy. For those who have the Catholic faith and those who are given through the gifts of the Holy Ghost Catholic piety and have a sense for what is holy, they embrace the traditional liturgy. And when the traditional liturgy is made available to them, people flock to that.
As Catholics, what can we do? The simple things we have always been told to do. Hold close to the faith, stay close to the sacraments, and pray, pray, pray.
In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. By all indications, contained within that etc. are to be found great and terrible truths of utmost concern not only to Catholics, but to all humanity. The whole truth is in the possession of those in the Vatican who have read the text of Our Lady's words and has been held there under lock and key since 1957. Clearly, in this time of unparalleled crisis in the Church and the world, with apocalyptic dangers looming over the whole human race, etc. is not enough.
It is very clear that currently the officials in Rome are covering up the truth about the third secret of Fatima. The simple fact that those who should be proclaiming the message are hiding it means that they themselves are going to be led into a desperate condition. What that is, we do not know. But they will certainly suffer. They will be punished. We have been told nations will be annihilated. There is a time of great suffering at hand.
And if the clergy steer in the wrong direction, especially if they're heading towards heresy, we have no obligation to follow them in that deviation, and we do have an obligation to adhere to the faith and pass that down as we've received it.
If you look at the history of the Rosary, it was given to the Church at a time when the Church was threatened with another diabolical disorientation, with the Albigensian heresy. It was the spiritual weapon in a crusade which actually took up real weapons. But this was the spiritual weapon Mary gave to again save us from another diabolical disorientation, such as we're facing now.
Sister Lucy points out that Our Lady has given even greater efficacy to the Rosary in our times. So if it has been so singularly potent in previous ages, we have the promise of Our Lady that it's going to be even more powerful and more potent against evil and sustaining our life of grace in our own age.
All this knowing about the liturgy, the changes, the apostasy, the third secret of Fatima would be nothing if it had nothing to do with the average person. If there were nothing we could do, then it would be nothing more than a story, something we'd read in the National Enquirer or something like that. But it's not. The average person is not helpless. Remember, we're saved by faith and good works. And I apply this to everything in the church. The faith on the one hand, I apply to prayer and sacrifice, the rosary, most especially the rosary.
Now, in the face of all this evidence of a cover-up, one might conclude that the situation is hopeless. The Vatican has apparently determined, or at least certain elements of the Vatican apparatus have determined, to suppress part of the third secret of Fatima, the part containing the words of the Virgin. And we have no way of knowing how to avert this disaster that's coming, so we should just sit there and wait for the end. But that isn't the case, because the Fatima prophecies are conditional. Yes, the annihilation of nations that Our Lady speaks of is predicted in the third secret of Fatima, but the third secret undoubtedly predicts the consequences of failing to do what the Virgin requested. As she said, if my requests are not granted, various nations will be annihilated. But if they are granted, what is predicted in the third secret can still be averted. And so what that means is, it's still within the power of the faithful to avoid disaster by simply doing what the Virgin requests of us. And that would be honoring and obeying the Fatima message by practicing the first Saturday devotion, praying the Rosary daily, seeking always the consecration of Russia, which will be the pivotal event, which when it occurs, as Sochi points out in his book, will avert disaster and transform the entire world. So there remains hope, because the Fatima prophecies are conditional.
It is very clear that the third secret has something to do with that immense punishment which is coming, which draws nearer every day. The world must know what's in the third secret of Fatima, because the world needs the opportunity to change its evil ways, to repent, to fall on its knees and beg for God's mercy. The Catholic churchmen have a duty to tell the Catholic faithful what is contained in the third secret without smokescreen, without obfuscation, without gimmicks, without games, without the nonsense that has gone on in the previous years. The time has come, and the third secret must be revealed in its fullness.
We have been warned. All of the evidence, including revelations by the highest Catholic churchmen, tells us that the third secret of Fatima prophesies an unprecedented crisis in the Church and a divine punishment of the whole world. The Pope, when he was then Cardinal Ratzinger, admitted that the secret concerns the dangers to the faith and the life of the Christian, and therefore the world. If the message of Fatima is to be believed, and the Church itself says the message is worthy of belief, unless we alter our present course, millions will lose the faith, and millions more will die.